The next morning I sat at my kitchen table sipping coffee, watching the footage from my roof cam while the sun peeked over the horizon. There it was, clear as daylight. Karen's silhouette in her second-floor window, the gun in her hand, the muzzle flash, a perfect angle, crisp audio, timestamp. She had no idea she had stepped into a chess match with someone who played tactics like second nature. I wasn't going to retaliate with violence or threats. I didn't need to. I had patience, training, and most importantly, every tool to let her dig her own grave in full daylight while I smiled and sipped chamomile. That morning she strutted onto her lawn with her ridiculous dog and the confidence of someone who truly believed she was untouchable. She waved at a neighbor and loudly said, "It's so good to keep this neighborhood safe from creeps," making sure I heard. I didn't react. That, more than anything, unnerved her. I spent the next few days turning my property into a legal fortress. Nothing dramatic, just smart, silent changes. I updated my cameras to store files in cloud storage instantly. I installed a low-profile motion sensor on the west fence and upgraded my video doorbell to stream directly to an off-site drive. My yard, once a place of peace, now doubled as a data trap for idiocy. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing for inevitability. Karen wasn't the type to retreat after being confronted. She was the type to escalate until she burned herself alive in the fire she started. That week, she ramped up the theatrics. A parade of false complaints rolled through, one for public indecency, one for noise pollution, another for practicing unregulated body rituals. Each one was printed on fake HOA letterhead and taped to my door like she was delivering royal decrees. I kept every single one in a folder. On Wednesday, I caught her on camera sneaking into my yard at night to plant broken glass in the flower bed near my mat. It was so immature it was almost funny. I didn't stop her. I let her finish and waited until she scurried away like a raccoon, then quietly cleaned it up and uploaded the footage to the backup drive. On Thursday, I attended the HOA meeting I had avoided so far, hoping to fly under the radar, but I figured it was time to introduce myself to the people Karen had poisoned with her suburban lies. The meeting was held in the community center, a beige, over-air-conditioned building that smelled like weak coffee and desperation. I walked in and immediately felt eyes on me. Karen was already seated at the front, flanked by two others, both clearly under her sway. She saw me and gave a smug little smirk like she'd already won. I took a seat at the back, stayed quiet, and waited for the show. It began predictably. She stood up, clutching a flash drive, and said in a dramatic voice, "We have a situation brewing in our peaceful community. One of our residents is endangering our values and possibly our lives." She plugged in the drive and played a choppy video montage of me doing yoga, edited with ominous music, captions like "unidentified ritual" and "potential cult activity." The room fell into awkward silence. Then she pulled out a laminated map and started pointing. "Here, he's facing the east at sunrise, classic invocation posture. Here, he lights incense, could be herbs, could be drugs. And here, this pose, clearly aimed at provoking female neighbors." I stood up slowly, calmly walked to the front, and asked if I could respond. The chair of the HOA, a frail man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, nodded nervously. I smiled and faced the room. "My name is Marcus. I recently moved here on medical leave after serving as a SWAT instructor for 10 years. The footage you saw was me doing yoga, which my doctor recommended for stress recovery. The incense is eucalyptus. The mat is mine. The land is mine. And the woman accusing me of cult activity fired a live round into my backyard 6 days ago." Gasps filled the room. Karen stood frozen. I have video evidence of the shooting, of her trespassing, and of fabricated HOA notices. I've submitted them to the sheriff's office. I only came here today to make the board aware that legal proceedings may soon involve this HOA due to her actions under your name. The silence after that statement was heavier than steel. Even Karen's two friends shifted in their seats like the ground beneath them was cracking. I walked back to my seat and let the weight of my words settle. Karen muttered something about Photoshop and deep fakes, but nobody was listening. The HOA chair tried to move to the next topic, but no one paid attention. After the meeting, A few neighbors approached me, apologized for not saying anything sooner, and admitted Karen had been a problem for months. One of them, Elaine, an ex-judge, leaned in and whispered she got kicked out of 2 neighborhoods before this. Her husband's military record, totally fake. Don't let her bait you. She thrives on attention. I thanked Elaine and headed home, more convinced than ever that this wouldn't stop until Karen had her spotlight moment, the one where her ego outpaced her common sense completely. So I gave her space to roam, making small changes to bait her further. I left my yoga mat outside, laid out at an angle that faced her yard just slightly more than before. I played soft music at a volume just high enough to make her wonder if it was some coded message. I started inviting 1 or 2 friends over, people from my SWAT team who dressed casually but walked with authority. Karen's eyes darted like a hawk every time she peeked out. Then came the most unhinged escalation yet. On Saturday morning, I woke up to find my backyard fence painted with red spray paint. Across the slats, in shaky, furious letters, "This is not a training camp." Next to it, a drawing of a stick figure in a yoga pose with devil horns. I stared at it for a minute, then calmly took a photo. I didn't scrub it off. I left it up, let the neighborhood see it. That evening, when she took her dog for a walk and saw me casually grilling while her graffiti stared back at her like a confession, she turned pale and walked faster. I filed the vandalism report online, uploaded the photo, and flagged the footage. It didn't take much to trace the spray can back to her trash bin. She wasn't even careful. The footage showed her sneaking over at 4:00 a.m. in a robe, 1 sock, and gloves that glowed like clown mittens in infrared. At this point, I didn't even feel anger, just a weird mix of curiosity and pity. What level of delusion convinced this woman that yoga was an attack on her freedom, that she needed to defend the neighborhood from a man doing sun salutations? But I also knew something else. We were getting close to the edge. The next move wouldn't be paint. It wouldn't be sprinklers or flyers or binoculars. The next move would be the one that either got her arrested or completely ruined. She was cornered by her own pride, and pride in the wrong hands pulls the trigger twice. Karen wasn't the kind of person to back down gracefully after being embarrassed at the HOA meeting. She didn't go silent or reflective. Instead, she doubled down in the most absurd ways imaginable, as if her personal vendetta had transformed into some holy suburban crusade. The very next morning, she began constructing what looked like a makeshift security tower in her backyard. It was really just an old lifeguard chair with a patio umbrella zip-tied to the top, but she sat up there with binoculars and a notepad like she was patrolling a prison yard. Every few minutes, her tiny dog would bark at absolutely nothing, and she'd scribble something down furiously. It was comical, ridiculous even, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Her obsession was escalating beyond nosiness. It was becoming hostile. I noticed subtle changes in the way neighbors acted when I passed by. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others gave awkward, apologetic smiles like they'd seen too much and were ashamed to say nothing. I didn't blame them. Karen was a loudmouth with a talent for turning fiction into panic. She plastered flyers around the neighborhood claiming I was an unlicensed paramilitary trainer conducting covert body control operations under the disguise of yoga. She even used a grainy still frame of me stretching from her edited video, printed with a red circle around my arm and the words "suspected game tattoo." It wasn't even a tattoo. It was a scar from a breaching drill gone wrong. I collected all the flyers I could find and added them to my growing folder of evidence. I was tempted to rip them all down, but a part of me wanted them seen. The more extreme she looked, the more her credibility slipped away. Still, I knew that wasn't enough to stop her. People like Karen don't lose battles. They just change tactics, and her next move made that perfectly clear. Late one night, I heard rustling by my garage. I checked the security feed and saw her silhouette creeping along the sidewall, holding something flat and metallic. She paused at my breaker box, looked around, then tried to wedge a sign in between the wires. It read, "Hazard, unauthorized power supply, subject to seizure." She left it there like it meant anything. I walked out into the yard and flipped on the floodlights. Karen froze mid-step like a bad actor caught in the middle of a stage cue. She tried to speak, but I just held up my phone recording. "You're trespassing again," I said quietly. She sputtered something about community safety and needing to inspect unauthorized modifications. I stayed calm. "Leave now, or I file tonight. You're done getting mornings." She scurried off like a child caught stealing cookies, but the damage was already done. I filed the report with the sheriff's office first thing in the morning, attaching all footage and images. They responded quickly this time. The lead investigator had already reviewed the shooting incident, and now, with this added pattern of behavior, they were beginning to see her for what she really was. The deputy told me to sit tight. They were preparing a formal case. That was good news, but what I didn't expect was how unhinged Karen would become when she realized the walls were closing in. She started a campaign of noise. Literally every time I stepped outside, she would blast an old military march anthem from a weatherproof speaker she'd mounted on her balcony. Not once, not randomly, only and exactly when I stepped onto my deck. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but it happened 3 mornings in a row, starting precisely when I unrolled my mat. I checked the timing against my footage. Sure enough, she was monitoring me through the blinds and triggering the music manually. It was always the same track. Stars and Stripes Forever, distorted and tiny. The 4th day, she added narration between songs, shouting things like, "This is America, not a yoga resort," and "Real men don't stretch." I didn't respond. I kept practicing. That, more than anything, drove her crazy. The calm, the lack of reaction, the absolute refusal to play her game. So she moved to sabotage. That evening, I found nails scattered along my driveway. Not 1 or 2, at least 2 dozen, placed in what could only be described as deliberate tire-killing formations. I called it in. Deputy Laurie returned, the same officer who responded to the initial shooting. When she saw the nails, she shook her head and said, "This is getting dangerous. She's not just annoying anymore. She's unstable." I nodded and handed her the drive with fresh security footage. Karen crouching low, scattering the nails under her hoodie, and dashing back to her porch. The next morning, I got a surprise visit from the HOA president, not the chair I'd seen fumbling through the meeting. This was a newer board member, a retired accountant named Samuel who'd only lived in the neighborhood a year. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a sheepish look. "Listen, I know things have gotten weird. Some of us weren't really sure what was true and what wasn't, but Karen's scaring people now. I've had 3 complaints from neighbors who caught her snooping in their yards looking for evidence of your cult." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were a dozen typed statements from residents, most anonymous, describing Karen's harassment, property invasion, and paranoia. "We're voting next week to strip her of her enforcement privileges, if you can call them that. I think we were all just too polite for too long. I thanked Samuel and promised to stay out of the way. I didn't want to dominate the situation or come off like I was trying to rally anyone. The truth was doing that for me. Every day she pushed further into madness. More people turned against her. But Karen didn't go quietly. In fact, that same night, I witnessed the most bizarre act yet. Around midnight, I heard a thud against my garage door, then another, then a strange metallic screech. I rushed to the side window and looked out. Karen was pushing a shopping cart filled with bricks toward my driveway. She was laying them down in a line across the entrance, like she was building a barricade. Her little dog barked hysterically as she muttered, "He can't leave. Not until he answers the tribunal." I didn't even move to stop her. I just recorded everything and called the sheriff. They arrived before she finished her last row. She tried to claim she was performing a citizen's zoning adjustment. The deputies looked tired, like parents dealing with a tantrum at the end of a 14-hour shift. They told her to go home and stay off my property permanently. She screamed about betrayal, the HOA and yoga being a foreign attack. She was issued a final warning and told the next offense would result in arrest. I knew then it was only a matter of time. She'd reached her tipping point. Her delusions weren't grounded in anything rational anymore. But instead of feeling relief, I felt something else. Focus. She hadn't just declared war on me. She declared it on logic, peace, and every decent neighbor trying to live quietly. So I braced for the next move because the final act was coming, and Karen, as always, would choose the worst possible way to make her last stand. Karen had vanished for 2 full days after the sheriff's warning, and it was the quietest stretch the neighborhood had experienced in weeks. No barking dog, no flyer on my door, no trumpet-blasted military marches echoing over the fence. For a moment, it felt like it might be over. I thought maybe, just maybe, the fear of jail time had snapped her back to reality. But with people like Karen, calm wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. And on the 3rd morning, her silence broke with a vengeance. At exactly 7:00 a.m., my security cameras picked up movement near the side of my property. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a strange scraping sound, like metal dragging against pavement. I checked the monitor. There she was in full view, wheeling a rusted gardening cart overflowing with what looked like camping gear, lawn signs, and a megaphone. I blinked, watching her set up a bizarre scene across her own lawn, positioning folding chairs, hanging a hand-painted banner between 2 poles that read "Defend Family Values" and "Expose the Yogi." She didn't look like someone who had been humbled. She looked like someone preparing for war. Within 20 minutes, Karen had staged what could only be described as a protest rally, though she was the only attendee. She stood on her lawn, directly facing my house, shouting through a megaphone about how the neighborhood was under siege by foreign exercise rituals. Her speech was a wild, disconnected blend of yoga conspiracy theories, spiritual paranoia, and claims that I was secretly hypnotizing local teens through meditation. I opened my curtains just enough to watch her pacing back and forth like she was holding a press conference. Her dog stood near her ankles, wearing a sandwich board made of cardboard that said, "Say no to stretching." She screamed phrases like, "You can't bend your way into heaven," and "Real men lift logs, not their legs." It was so absurd I would have laughed, but I could see something more dangerous hiding under the nonsense. She truly believed every word. The neighbors began to trickle out slowly, watching from behind hedges and parked cars. Most were confused. A few recorded on their phones. A couple waved apologetically in my direction, as if to say, "We know she's nuts. We're just not sure what to do about it." I didn't step outside. I didn't need to. She was already incriminating herself live on multiple security feeds, drawing attention to her instability more efficiently than anything I could have planned. I saved the footage automatically, then made a quick call to Deputy Lori. She answered on the 2nd ring, already aware. "We've had 3 calls about her this morning. I'm headed over now." I thanked her and hung up, watching Karen scream something about Chakers being government mind control programs when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up. Karen's face lit up, not with fear, but with a delusional confidence. She marched right over to Lori, waving a stack of papers she clearly printed herself, shouting, "This is the evidence you needed. He's starting a cult. Look at this. He breathes deeply, on purpose." Lori glanced at the paper, flipped through a few pages, and sighed heavily. "Karen, you're interfering with community peace again, and now you're creating public disturbances." Karen pointed at me. "At my house? Really?" and shrieked, "He's a threat to our moral ecosystem." That phrase, later posted online, would end up becoming a viral meme. Lori calmly instructed her to shut the protest down and told her this was the final warning before a mental health hold would be requested. After the cruiser left, Karen retreated back into her house, red-faced and fuming. She didn't dismantle her signs. She left them up like markers of some imaginary border war. That afternoon, I found several of them scattered on my lawn. I collected them without expression and stored them as evidence. I knew now that this was the stretch before the break. She was teetering on the edge of something much more severe, and it wasn't about yoga anymore. It was about control, the illusion of authority. She couldn't handle the fact that she'd failed to intimidate me, failed to sway the neighborhood, and failed to turn the HOA into her personal army. Later that evening, I reviewed the security footage from the past few nights and noticed something that made my stomach drop. Karen hadn't just been trespassing. She had, on at least 2 occasions, approached my back window with what appeared to be a small device in her hand. I zoomed in. It looked like a radio scanner. She was trying to listen in through the walls, as if I were running some secret broadcast. That wasn't just obsession. It was dangerous behavior, possibly criminal. I compiled the clips and forwarded them to Lori with a formal statement. Her response came back quickly. "This crosses the line. We're opening a criminal investigation and notifying the district attorney." The next day, Karen struck back the only way she still could, through humiliation, or at least her attempt at it. Early in the morning, a stack of flyers was taped across several homes on the block, mine included. They featured an edited photo of me doing yoga, my face distorted, with text that read, "Enemy of the State, Exercise Cult Exposed." Beneath it, in smaller print, "Do not let your children be recruited through stretching. Beware the brothers." I didn't tear them down. I didn't have to. Most were taken down by the neighbors themselves. One even knocked on my door, holding the crumpled flyer and saying, "I'm so sorry this is happening. We're with you." That was the first time I truly felt the tide had turned. Karen had burned her last bridge. What remained was just the slow collapse of her fantasy. Samuel from the HOA came by that afternoon and asked if I would speak at the next meeting, not to address the yoga issue, but to share some of my law enforcement background and help develop a neighborhood protocol for conflict mediation. I agreed, not because I wanted to be involved, but because I understood now that silence enabled people like Karen. Avoiding conflict gave her the oxygen she needed. Addressing it publicly, directly, with facts and calm authority, that starved her. That evening, I sat on the deck with the sunset painting everything in orange and gold. I watched as a group of neighborhood kids rode their bikes past Karen's house, slowing slightly, pointing at her signs and giggling. She yanked open her blinds and glared but didn't step outside. The power she thought she held was slipping, one small moment at a time. A neighbor on the far end of the street started playing soft classical music from their porch, a sharp contrast to the military marches that had once blared. It felt symbolic. The noise was being replaced with peace. I rolled out my mat, settled into a seated position, and exhaled deeply. The breeze was cool. The air smelled like jasmine and rain. I knew the final confrontation was close. Karen wasn't the type to fade quietly. She would go out with a bang, not a whimper. But I was ready, because no matter what she did next, the neighborhood wasn't watching me anymore. They were watching her. And in the end, she would reveal exactly who she was, with no help from me at all. The morning Karen decided to end her campaign with one final act of lunacy began deceptively calm. The sun was just rising. The dew still clung to the blades of grass, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't hear distorted patriotic music or the screech of her dog echoing across the fence. The neighborhood had started to return to a kind of uneasy normal. The HOA had quietly voted to suspend Karen from attending meetings or submitting complaints, a decision they didn't advertise publicly, but one I heard about through Samuel. The vandalism reports were being processed, and Deputy Lori had informed me that they were preparing to file formal charges related to trespassing, harassment, and reckless endangerment. But Karen must have sensed the net closing around her, because what she did next erased any last doubt about how far she was willing to go. I was sitting on the back deck with a cup of coffee when I noticed movement through the gaps in her hedge, not the usual pacing or peeking. This was calculated, focused. She had donned what looked like a black hoodie and camo pants, almost as if she thought she was infiltrating enemy territory. In her hands, she held a long duffel bag, one that sagged slightly in the middle, like it carried weight. I didn't need to guess. I already had a good idea. I slipped inside and tapped a key on my laptop to bring up the live security feed. Every angle of my yard lit up with clean, color-coded boxes tracking movement. Karen stepped through the weak point in her fence she created the week before. She crossed into my yard. That was it. The moment she touched my property with a weapon, everything changed. I stayed inside, locked the door behind me, and hit the alert. A silent notification that went out to the sheriff's department and to 3 of my former SWAT colleagues who had helped me set up the system. Then I went to the front of the house and waited just behind the curtain. I could hear her muttering to herself outside. Every step she took around my patio was deliberate, like she believed she was on some mission to save the world from yoga terrorism. The sound of the duffel bag unzipping reached my ears like thunder. I knew she was pulling it out. I just didn't know what she had until the next second passed. A scoped rifle. Not a toy. Not an airsoft. A legitimate bolt-action rifle, likely illegal and definitely not registered to someone with Karen's record. She crouched behind my trimmed bushes and pointed the barrel at the deck. I had already pulled the security feeds to a split screen and activated the drone cam. Yes, I had a drone. A small, quiet one meant for property inspections, but fully capable of providing overhead surveillance. I launched it from the side hatch, watching as it buzzed silently above her position. She didn't notice it. Her focus was singular. She adjusted her aim, settled in, and waited. For what? I didn't know. Maybe she thought I was going to walk out and do my morning stretches like always. Maybe she was planning on firing a warning shot like before, only this time with more range and confidence. But she was wrong, because she didn't know she was already surrounded. Deputy Lori was the first on the scene, pulling up with her lights off, stopping 1 block away and approaching 1 foot. Then came the unmarked SUV. My old friend Thomas from SWAT, now part of a local special response unit, stepped out in plain clothes, but his vest was already on beneath. He made eye contact with me through the window and nodded. I nodded back. The takedown would happen fast, clean. No one wanted Karen hurt, but no one could afford to let her continue. She never saw them coming. Within seconds, 3 officers emerged from around the corner and 1 from behind the fence. Before she could even shout, Thomas had her pinned, the rifle kicked away from her grasp and into the bushes. She thrashed, screamed about patriots under siege, and hostile takeovers by yoga cults. Her dog barked uncontrollably, snapping at the boots of officers while she was handcuffed and dragged up from the grass. I stepped outside finally, silent, hands in my pocket. She looked at me like I had orchestrated the downfall of her entire universe. She screamed, "You did this. You're all part of it. You think you're peaceful, but you're the dangerous one." I didn't say a word, just kept eye contact, then turned around and walked back inside. The moment was surreal. The neighborhood, once ruled by whispers and tension, stood outside their homes in silence, curtains drawn, phones held up, recording everything, and the myth of Karen collapsed in real time. The woman who tried to label me as a threat was now screaming conspiracy theories while being led to a cruiser in zip ties. Her reputation, her credibility, and her reign of ridiculousness had ended in a flash of sirens and the sharp click of handcuffs. Later that afternoon, Deputy Lori returned to give me an update. The rifle had indeed been unregistered. Karen was being held on multiple charges: illegal possession of a firearm, trespassing, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, and obstruction of justice. There would be no more warnings, no more investigations that ended in polite visits. It had moved from nuisance to felony territory. I nodded as she spoke, not surprised, only relieved that the storm was over, or at least contained. The HOA issued an emergency statement the next day disavowing Karen completely. Her membership was revoked, her voting privileges stripped. She was barred from any future meetings, and the board launched a new initiative for neighborhood mental wellness support, which felt like a long overdue realization that ignoring chaos only lets it grow. Samuel called me personally to thank me for not overreacting. He said it showed restraint and grace under pressure. I told him that's what I was trained for. Chaos is just noise. The goal is to stay centered while it passes. That night, I finally returned to my backyard without fear. I rolled out my mat beneath the stars. No sirens, no yelling, no gunshots. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear the wind. I moved through each pose with clarity, with purpose, and with gratitude. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about reclaiming peace. Karen had tried to take that from me, but in the end, she only handed me the proof of how essential it was. As I reached the final pose, lying flat on my mat, staring at the open sky, I thought about how absurd everything had been. The fact that yoga had sparked a neighborhood war, that a middle-aged woman thought she could defeat calm with bullets, that she never knew who she was really dealing with. But the truth was, it wasn't about me being a SWAT instructor. It wasn't about tactics or training. It was about staying grounded when insanity rattles the fence. and tonight, for the first time in a long while, the ground was steady beneath me again. Weeks passed, and the street began to resemble something close to normal. The stairs stopped. The whispers faded. People no longer avoided my eyes or crossed the street when walking past my yard. A few brave neighbors started offering nods, then quiet hellos, and eventually full greetings. It was odd how quickly a neighborhood could transform after the source of its chaos had been removed. Without Karen's relentless theatrics poisoning the air, there was space for decency again. Even the HOA, previously a silent accomplice to her reign, began undoing the knots she tied around the community. They hosted a small meet and greet for newer residents, and to my surprise, someone left an actual invitation in my mailbox. No Comic Sans, no threats, just a polite note with a time and location. I went, mostly out of curiosity. The room buzzed with cautious energy. People weren't sure what kind of person I really was, only that I'd been the target of Karen's madness and had somehow walked out unshaken. Elaine, the retired judge, approached with a smirk. She'd always known the truth. "You do realize," she told me, "she told half the neighborhood you were a covered agent for a yoga cartel, right?" I laughed. "What even is a yoga cartel?" She shrugged. "According to her, it's people who breathe deeply and overthrow HOAs. That broke the ice for others. One by one, residents began sharing their own experiences, small but telling run-ins with Karen. She reported someone's holiday wreath for being too pagan. Another neighbor admitted she caught Karen photographing her garbage bins on 3 separate occasions, insisting she was checking for contraband. Apparently, Karen had also filed a complaint against a Child's Lemonade stand for unsanctioned liquid sales. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so exhausting for everyone involved. Eventually, the talk turned serious. A new board member suggested implementing formal training for HOA volunteers, particularly regarding conflict resolution and mental health sensitivity. They even floated the idea of creating a neighborhood watch, not to enforce rules, but to provide assistance for those who genuinely needed support. It was progress. For the first time, the neighborhood wasn't just patching over problems. It was trying to prevent them. And I had no intention of leading anything, but I did offer to help design the security framework for their proposed watch program. I kept the offer casual. I wasn't looking to become a suburban superhero, just someone who didn't want to live in chaos again. A few days later, I received an unexpected package at my door. It was from Thomas, my old SWAT buddy, who'd helped take Karen down. Inside was a framed photo of my exploded yoga gong, cracked clean through with a bullet hole dead center. Beneath it, he'd attached a printed caption that read, "Peace is earned. So is karma." I laughed harder than I had in months. It was grim, yes, but it perfectly captured the absurdity of what I'd survived. I hung it in my garage above the workbench, a silent reminder of how close peace can come to being shattered, and how satisfying it is to rebuild it afterward. As for Karen, the last I heard, she'd been ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation before trial. Her charges weren't going away. Between the unregistered firearm, multiple trespassing counts, and the recorded threats, she was looking at a long list of consequences. Her house was put up for sale shortly after her arrest, and within 2 weeks, a sold sign appeared on the lawn. The property sat dark and silent for a while, the hedges overgrown, the mailbox sagging like it had given up too. No one touched the lifeguard chair she turned into a watchtower. It remained like a monument to madness until one day, a crew came in and dismantled it without ceremony. Just like that, the last physical trace of her was erased. The new owners who moved in were a quiet couple in their 30s with a baby and a Labrador. Friendly, low-key, and refreshingly normal. On their first day, they knocked on my door to introduce themselves and apologized for the chaos they'd inherited. I assured them they had nothing to worry about and even helped them rewire their outdoor security lights when they ran into trouble. For the first time since moving in, I had a genuine, peaceful, neighborly connection, and that felt like a victory far greater than any courtroom win or public takedown. I resumed my daily yoga routine without hesitation. No interruptions, no suspicious glares, just me, the mat, and the morning sun. Some days, a few neighbors even joined from their own yards. waving or copying my poses with sheepish amusement. It was never anything organized, just small gestures of shared peace. One morning, Elaine shouted over the fence, "Look at you, neighborhood menace turned morning coach." I laughed and bowed playfully. Things had shifted. The air felt lighter, the space safer. Eventually, I was invited to give a short talk at the local community center about situational awareness and personal boundaries. Nothing formal, just a cue and a session for residents who wanted to learn how to spot escalating behavior and manage neighborhood conflict. I kept it simple. I told them not everything needed to be a fight, but some situations demanded action, and that calm wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Afterwards, several people approached to thank me, not just for the advice, but for not losing control when someone else had. That, to me, was the greatest compliment. Anyone can fight fire with fire, but containing it with discipline, that takes something deeper. The story of what happened here began circulating online in little pieces. A clip from the HOA meeting leaked. Someone uploaded the footage of Karen's arrest, followed by a still of the absurd yoga cult flyer. Before long, it made its way to a subreddit where entitled people were showcased like urban legends. The title read, "Karen tries to shoot at yoga instructor. Turns out he's a SWAT trainer. Instant regret." I didn't post it. I didn't need to. But watching people from around the world comment, laugh, and shake their heads in disbelief reminded me that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and a lot funnier too. In the end, Karen didn't just give me a story. She gave this quiet stretch of suburbia a wake-up call. People stopped ignoring warning signs. They started talking more, listening more, and questioning the voices that shouted the loudest. And me, I didn't need to teach anyone a lesson. I just needed to keep showing up, calm, and unshaken, until the storm passed. And when it did, I stretched again under the morning sky, steady as stone, peaceful as breath, because sometimes the greatest revenge is not reacting at all. Sometimes it's just showing the world you never needed to fight back, because the truth, the law, and time were always on your side.